So now that we have some basic functionality in, let's take a moment and spice things up, make things look a little bit more flashy by using some assets. If you go to the Epic Game Launcher and you go to Marketplace and under Permanently Free Collection, there is an asset here called Factory Environment Collection. If you click in on this and then download and create a project of this, it will take quite a while because it's rather large, but this seems to be sort of fitting to what we're creating today. And from this project we will be taking some assets and then putting into ours and see if we can make something look okay also, in addition to hopefully being fun. So once you have the project downloaded, it might take a while for it to start up because it's loading a lot of assets and it's starting up on a map where a demonstration map, so be patient with the loading. But once you've made it into the project, there is a map called Overview, which is the map I currently have open here. In this map you can see all of the assets laid out, so you can like look around and see what they are and things like that. I will be taking some of the assets. I've been looking around a little bit here, looking for some things that might be like appropriate for what we're doing. So I'll be making a list for you to see exactly which items that I took, if you want to have exactly the same items and recreate what I'm doing today. Otherwise you can pick out some items here for yourself that you think are interesting, and you can always come back and add to them later as well. But for the setup here, what you have is you have one folder for FX, which is your particle systems. So we might be taking some items here, and so the particle systems that I've noted, you will find those in this folder. Then there is audio. If we take any sound files from this project in the list that I have on the screen hopefully now, then they will be from this folder. And then under meshes you have all the models basically. So the mesh root folder here, everything that has a light bluish hue underneath it here, those are all the static meshes. And in these folders that are in the mesh folder, those are for all the skeletal meshes. When you want to follow my instructions and import the assets that you have found interesting, what you'll do is you will mark them, and then you'll right click, and then you'll have an asset action, and you can use bulk export. Once you've chosen that, you'll go to the directory where you have into the content folder, and then you'll just either create a folder here which says assets or something like that, or you can just post it in the content folder and it should be fine for you to import it to your project. When you have all of your assets selected, you just right click, you go up to asset actions, and you go to the migrate option. It will tell you everything that it will need to export, because it will take all of its dependencies and such to make sure that it looks okay when you move it over. You put it in a folder in the project that we're currently working on, the game project, and select folder, and okay, it wants to move to a game content folder, my bad. We'll go up to the content folder and let it do its own thing there. There you go. Once that's done, you go back to your original project, and it should be showing up here. Something to note is that it will have the same folder structure as it did in the other project. So all of the meshes you, for example, imported will end up in a mesh folder, and materials will end up in materials, and audio, and so on. So just to keep that in mind. you're free to move it around in a better structure once you have already imported it into the project. I noticed a bug in our game so far that we've introduced, and I just wanted to make sure that we get rid of it immediately. So I will start by demonstrating the problem. You might have noticed it yourself already, and after that we will discuss why the bug is happening, and then we'll fix it. So if we go back to our game state there, and we go and set our time remaining to something short like 3, compile save, and then we start. You will notice that when you click on, you just hold down on the retry button, for example, you see that it actually hovers down and then it starts hovering. And let's go discuss why that is happening. To do that, we need to go to our HUD. Yes. So we have bound the event dispatcher that time gets to update, so that will execute this event. And then we have bound that the event player has lost when the time reaches 0 to this event. The problem is we keep getting the message that the player has lost because our timer gets down to 0, and then each second after that we also get the message sent from the game state saying the timer is 0, which means that the player has lost. So we get this message multiple times, which means that this sort of acts as a refresh of the user interface, basically making it so that when we click down the mouse button for a button, we'll get the HUD sent to us again to display it from this event, and then it unregisters that we were already holding down our button. So what we need to do is, or one way to do this is that once we've gotten the message that we have lost, we don't need to receive it anymore. So we could actually get our game state and say, let's do that, get game state, and then we'll cast it to pp game state so we can actually reach the things that we have done inside of it. So we want to call on this first, and then we want to go and say from this we want to unbind player lost event. So by hooking up this event here, we will say that once we get this event, we want to stop listening for this event, and then we'll continue executing everything like normal here. So we'll just move everything, maybe not like so. There we go. So we get some space here. Then we can drag this down here. Maybe clean this up a little bit as well. So yeah, and this is good practice anyway to make sure that if you have an event dispatcher that you're listening to make sure that you stop listening when it's no longer relevant for you. So let's try this out. We hold down the mouse button and you can see that it doesn't stop hovering, and then I can release to actually make it happen. And then you might have noticed that we still get this message again when we have a retry after reaching 0 time again. And the reason for that is, if we go back to our HUD here, this actual binding is created on the construct in the HUD. And the HUD is constructed in the first person character in its event graph when it comes to its begin play, which we have up here. This part here. And the begin play is created or sent whenever the player is created when the game starts. You might be thinking we already started, and that is true. However, what we did before was that we, when we lost, if we go to let's see here, we go to our retry button here. We reset the information on the game mode so that it's like it is from the beginning, and then we open up the level. This is essentially like we're starting up the game again, because our character doesn't survive between level changes. It gets destroyed and then created again when we enter a new level, and therefore everything else starts functioning like we had just started from the first time. So that's why everything is actually working, which is very convenient for us currently. So let us take a look at some of the assets that we brought in from the other project and start changing some of the classes and blueprints that we've made so far. So if we start with the escalator, for example, we can click it either here or find it in the blueprints folder. So we open it up here, and then we have the viewport. So this is our visual representation of the conveyor belt. Now that we have assets that could replace these, we can actually just do exactly that. So if we go to meshes, we have downloaded, among other things, something called the SM assembly line, which very much looks like a conveyor belt kind of object, right? So this is very fitting for our case right now. So if we have this marked, and then we go back to our blueprint again of a conveyor belt, then the engine will remember that we have it marked over here in the map still. So when we go into the conveyor belt and we go and click on belt mesh, which is what's representing our belt, we can go to its static mesh here and just click the arrow button, and it will replace the mesh here with whatever mesh is currently selected. So there we go. So the first thing we notice here is that it looks very stretched and thin. That's because we changed the scale for this. So if we just reset the scale to begin with clicking the yellow button, yellow arrow over here, then we will reset everything both height-wise and length and width-wise, so it looks better, right? So that's the first part. The second part is that we need to adjust the belt volume to actually match this now, because the belt volume also got its volume scale changed by trying to fit it to our object that we had before. So what we can do first is we can go and see this in the world and see what it looks like. So this is the size it currently has. To make this more fluid, we can do so. So we undock this conveyor belt by dragging it out from the dock, the tab, and then we can enlarge it a little bit so we get some space here. That's not a good way to do it. Let's do it this way, because we need some width here to see our scale and location, rotation and such. So we want to have something that looks good in relationship to both our character and to the objects that we're gonna spawn, right? So what we can do as a reference is we can bring in a pickup blue, for example, and put it over here. So then we'll see that the blue box is gonna be in relation to this, like this large. And this might be a good point of reference. However, I would claim that it would be better to have something in relationship to our actual character. Our actual character we happen to still have over here. So if we drag it over here, we can see that this capsule component now represents basically the size of a man. So with that in mind, this conveyor belt might look a little bit big. So let's change that by changing the scaling on the belt mesh to something that's, and then click in the lock next to scaling here on the right, so that when we change one of these values, all of them change, so it gets uniform. We can change it to 0.8 first. Still maybe a bit large. Let's try 0.5. This looks like it might be workable, right? So let's keep it at that for now. So now that we've decided what kind of a size we need to have for a conveyor belt, we need to adjust our volume, because our volume is what dictates how things are moved on the conveyor belt. So we will scale the volume down. In height, we can scale it further, I think. Maybe something like so. Move it down a bit. Scale it a little bit along the red x-axis. And width looks perfectly fine, I think. Compile and save. Let's see where our spawner is. Is this our spawner? This is our spawner. So we will move this one a little bit like so. We still have our arrow here, so we can see which direction it will actually move in. So let's play and see what this looks like. Looks okay. So one of the things we might want to do is actually move this so it's flush with the floor. We can do this by selecting the object and then pressing the End key. It will find the object below it and make sure that it's flush against it. So this looks like our conveyor belt is now spiffy and looking nice for us, right? Let's move on with a different object. So when it comes to our drop-off areas, we can open up our drop-off area parent class, go to its viewport, and then we have its mesh. And for this one we will go back to the meshes folder, and I figured that the one that's called let's see, the SM layout table looked like it might be something that would be fitting for the drop-off area. So let's see how that actually looks. So same way, we select it out in the content folder, we go into the drop-off area, we select the drop-off area mesh, click the arrow button to input the mesh directly into the slot for the static mesh. Again, we have scaled this a little bit, so we might want to rescale this by resetting it first. So this is what the object actually looks like by itself. We compile and save. We do the same thing here. And we go and find where's the drop-off area. There it is. So we undock it so we have the ability to work with it at the same time as looking at it in the world. Okay, this is a very large area. Yeah, we might need to scale this down a lot. So let's try it with something like 0.2. What you might have noticed also was that we have 3 of them. It's because we're changing the parent class that will affect all the other instances of the child classes that were created also, because they will inherit this mesh currently that we're changing. So we can see that it looks okay like this. Maybe we want it to be a little bit larger along the green x-axis since it's a little bit thin in that way. So we will unhook the lock and maybe go, let's try 0.3. That looks decent enough. So let's say we're happy with that. You might have whatever dimensions you want here, of course, so that you feel that it is representative for what you want it to be. But now our volume is completely off, of course. And we will reset this one because that's going to be a little bit faster. We will move it down. Then we'll start scaling it. The x-axis. Then we go around here and do it for the y-axis. Then we'll do it on the z-axis. And we can move it up again a little bit. You probably need to scale it slightly further because you don't want to get the feeling that you're putting something inside of the area and it's not counting. It's not a very good feeling as a player. Okay, so that's that. Let's go back into the world and see what it looks like. Now, you might have noticed that the drop-off area and the drop-off area blue and the drop-off area red are varying in sizes. The reason why this is because we went and did manual adjustments to these after we had put them into the world, so they're going to be varying in sizes. And the best way to handle this is probably to, let's see here, if we go to our area red, it will have its measurements there. So let's just do this and see what happens. We go to blueprints, we pick the pickup blue, no, not the pickup blue, sorry, the drop off area blue. So it's selected. Might want to save these first also. I'm not entirely sure what, it might be from the changes of the parent. So now we change the blue one. Let's see if we can right click and then replace selected actor with drop off area blue, and it's gonna suggest this because this is the one that's selected. It got the same measurements. However, it does look like it has the same as the drop off area. Let's try for the red one. No, that didn't change. Okay. Right. We not only did we... Okay, so here's the problem then. We scaled all of these individually after placing them into the world. What we need to have is... Yeah, okay. So if you drag it into the world now, you can see that this is the actual measurements it's gonna have. These are the measurements that are multiplied with our current scale, which is the one that we made for the beginning area. So we need to go back in again to the drop-off area and make some adjustments to make sure that it is the size that we want it to be. And we need to compare it now to the unchanged one. So this is probably what we did with the conveyor belt as well. Yeah, so we need to change that as well. Okay, so we'll do one at a time. My bad for that. But yeah, this is good practice, I think. So we have our area here. We will reset its scaling on the drop-off area mesh to whatever it is to begin with, which is 111, which is, let's also get rid of the red, the blue, and the drop-off area. There we go. So we only have this one. Okay, from this we can see, okay, we want to increase the width a little bit, so we'll go for 1.5, and that looks acceptable to me. And we compile and save. And now if we drag in a blue one, we're gonna save these. They should be the same size, yeah. Okay, so that's good. We've fixed that part now. Let's go fix the conveyor belt quickly. So we have the conveyor belt here, and we will make sure to bring in one that is unaltered. So this is the real one, it looks kind of tiny. And we will go to the belt mesh. Then we reset it. We'll remove this one. Have only this one here. So this one looks kind of tiny now in comparison. So let's try to scale it to maybe 2 times. It looks maybe a bit big. 1.4. That looks maybe okay. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, so now we need to do the other changes as well, which is that we need to change the volumes for these. But since we changed the volumes before we started doing this last scaling, that means that they will all be okay, hopefully, now that this one seems to be matching this one because it's subservient to the belt mesh here. So when we adjusted it to fit this mesh, when we start scaling this mesh, the volume will follow along. And hopefully we did the same thing for the drop area. Seems like we are fine there as well. And if we go to check the blue ones, they should be just as good. Yeah, okay. So a few mistakes along the way, but that is acceptable, I think. From here, we can drag this one to a slightly different position, and we can place it a little bit deeper underground, so it looks like something like that. Makes it look a little bit better in my opinion. We can make a blue one, drop it down a little bit, maybe so. And then a red one, drop that one down a little bit. So now you might notice that we have lost our ability to see the drop-off area texts because they have been retracted in. Let's go change that, and we'll change that by going to our parent class again, because that's the root of all the problems. So we change to being translating, drag it up. We'll have it something like slightly above the volume area. Should be fine, I think. Compile and save. And now that is fixed for all of the different platforms. Okay, let's keep moving along. The next thing we might want to change is perhaps our pickups. Make them look a little bit more interesting. So if we go to our, we can still have our main class pickup here be the square, which allows us to see that if we change all the children to be something like, well, what I've picked out for these objects is we're going to have one as an engine and the other one as a fire extinguisher. It might be good to keep the parent class as something like this gray box so that you know that if you spawn it into the world and you never intended the parent class to actually be an object in the world, you see the box and therefore you see that, oh, something's wrong here. I forgot to put in the right class, or I forgot to make a change. Like it works sort of as a debugging warning visually, basically. Yeah. So let's go into the pickup blue and let's go change its pickup mesh. Now you see that its pickup mesh is inherited from the parent, and that is fine because we still have the ability to actually override it. So if we do that, we go here to meshes and we go and find the SM engine. We click on that. We go back to our pickup. Where did you go? Pickup blue, and then you click here. You can see that it's still, you can't see there actually, you can see here, it still replaces the mesh with whatever mesh that we put in here. In addition to that, it's done some other things here. Let's see if we can find, we'll arrange these tabs together so they will be easier to work with. And the pickup, the pickup here has a Z of 50. That is fine, I think. But this engine has a displacement, it seems. So we might want to move that a bit back. And a bit down. So this should represent where our center is. I'm not entirely sure why this has a pivot point that's different here, but that's fine, I think. We can also get rid of our, or we can hide it possibly. Hidden in game, no, visible. We can still keep this as a debugger for later, but for now we don't want to see it here because it's getting in the way. So we set visibility to unchecked for the test, which was the circle that we had. Other than that, we can see that the engine is blue, and the reason why the engine is blue is because we have this material which we had before. So if we reset that, it should be using its own material for element 0, making it look like it was intended to be looking. So we compile that. Now we need to do something similar for the red one. So again, when it came to the drop-off areas, we changed the mesh of the parent object, which cascaded down to all the children. But now we're changing on all the individual children instead, meaning that they are the only one who are getting affected. Unless they were to have children later on, then they would be looking by default as these meshes that we're picking right now. So this one would be using the SM fire extinguisher. And where did it go? There's the red one. We'll replace that one. We will reset the material. We will go to the test one. We will set visibility on this one to hidden also. There we go. Then we click on our pickup mesh again and we can see that this one is somewhat above ground. We don't want that, so we want to bring it down. It's probably going to be good if we put it at 0 here. Yes. Let's go back and check our engine quick and see if that's also correct here. No, it seems like we need to lower the engine further. Let's hope that it's something consistent like -50 maybe, -100. Is that right? Not entirely sure, it looks like it's not quite right. Minus 80, minus 85. No, let's try minus 80. Anyway, the easiest way is probably to bring these items into the world and see what they look like. So if we were to bring our blueprints, we have a cube here, we can remove that one. Oh, that was the cube from behind. Let's keep that one. Did not intend to do that. So we'll save these so they're done, and then we take the pickup blue here and we drop it. And we see that it is dropping it in a little bit in the ground, which isn't great, I guess. But if you were to change in the blueprint, let's see if we can do this in real time. Maybe that will make it easier. There we go. And let's see here. We want to move this one upwards. So location minus 70, minus 65, minus 67, something like that looks okay, I think. Not a very convenient number, but it is what it is. And let's see if we need to do something similar for our red pickup, or if that one is better. This one seems to be flush with the ground immediately. Okay, so we can put this back. Can remove these objects. Then we can take our spawner. What is this engine doing here? Let's remove that one. And we'll move this one a little bit, like so. Try to put it so it's going to be at least dropping it on top of the conveyor belt. That looks okay. Let's see what this looks like now. Not very good. Okay. First of all, it seems to be going the wrong way. That's one issue. Second one is that we're getting this screen too quickly because we have not changed our game state since our bug fix earlier. So let's start with the game state. Game state is over there. We'll put back time remaining 100. Compile, then we go back. And then we see that our arrow is pointing in that direction, which is the opposite to the one we had intended. So we will change this around 180 degrees. Then we'll try again. Okay. Now you can see it's going in the right direction. However, it is starting to fly way ahead over the conveyor belt, which doesn't look very nice. And that is because of our volume, right? If we were to change our volume, so it's the conveyor belt, change our volume so that it is shorter above the ground, maybe something like that, it would probably look a bit better. It's still moving before hitting it, so this is about tweaking, right? So you might want to have it further lower or scale it down further. Just finding something that you find acceptable and looking nice, right? Okay, so things are falling off now. Let's see if we can pick them up. So I picked it up and I have it in my hands. I can drop it off. Let's see the blue one. It shouldn't do anything. Let's pick it up again. Let's try the red one. And it despawned. So now you can start to see some issues that we're having. If you're, let's like point them out a little bit again. If we take a fire extinguisher, for example, of course we're not getting any fire extinguishers. Let's get the box. So this box over here, if we place it on this surface, you can see that it's floating above it. The reason for this is we have collisions on each of these objects. So for this particular object it was the SM layout table. So if we open that one up, this is our static mesh explorer, or where we can like view a lot of information about our static meshes. among these things are collisions. So if we click collision here and simple collision, you might notice that we get this these green bars around the object itself here. Now these are okay, I would say, but they are, for our intents and purposes, causing a little bit of an issue because it's making objects float a little bit above. So if we were to lower these, if you click on the green box and then lower it a bit and press save and then go back and try. Hopefully, didn't I get the box in time? Okay, let's try with the fire extinguisher. You can see it's dropping closer to the ground and looking better. Let's try on. Okay, is of course not going to work because that should be spawning it, right? No. So this one, they're still floating a little bit, so we could probably drive this one down a little bit further just to make it look a little bit better. Okay, let's push that one over a little bit. Okay, that's not a little bit. Let's get another fire extinguisher. Okay, it looks like it's snug to the floor now, right? So we can live with this, I think. Another of the issues that we get is that when we pick up the engine, it's going to be more clear. When we pick up the fire extinguisher, it looks like, okay, we get it where we expect it to be. But when we pick up an engine, it sort of disappears, but it doesn't really disappear. You can see it in the left there. It's going to be slightly offset. And this has to do with the fact that we moved our object around in our pickup blue. There we go. In this one we have actually moved it around the inside of this area, so it's a bit offset. So going back to the factory project, I saw that there was an engine available. We had picked this one to begin with. There is this engine instead, which is called Modify Pivot, which is better because you can see it actually appears wherever you drop it in the world. This will make it much less of a headache for us, so we will choose this engine instead for our engine. So let's go to our pickup blue. We'll replace the mesh with this one. We will reset its transform again, so it's over here. We should also probably, because you don't want to have like translations back and forth all the time between different objects, so we should probably clean this up by going to the base pickup object and resetting its pivot point to the center again by clicking the yellow arrow, saving it, then going up to our blue one and compiling and saving. It should now be aligned with from the parent, and we should check the red one also because we moved the red one, so the red one has been moved a bit here now. Or has it? We don't have a reset over here. Oh, that's the wrong mesh, this one. So this one is also sent for the center. Let's see what they look like when we put the blueprints in the world. The engine appear where we want it, and so does the fire extinguisher. So if we were to play now, hopefully this should fix most, if not all, of our issues. So it's appearing in front of us like we expect. We drop it down, it looks okay. Pick up an engine, it's in front of us. Drop it here, looks okay. We drop it over here where it's supposed to be. It gets despawned. Okay, so we're making some progress. So now that we have made some changes here, we should also start cleaning up some of the changes that we have done. So for example, our pickup and our pickup blue are no longer represented by blue, right? It's an engine, so we should rename this blueprint class to pickup engine. And we should do the same for fire extinguisher, or red. Fire extinguisher. Okay. Now the nice thing is that these changes that we did here now will cascade and change everywhere where they are used. So if we were to go to the drop-off area blue, for example, and open that one up, we can see that under its desired pickup now, it will instead be pointing towards pickup engine. So all the references will be fixed immediately. Since this name should now not longer be blue, it should probably be engine. We can change that while we're here. Compile and save. We should find our drop-off area red. And you see that it's pointing to the fire extinguisher now. We should rename this one to fire extinguisher. And we compile and save. So now we have cleaned that up. Let's proceed with changing out some more of the assets here. So if we click on the floor, for example, you can see that it's outlined if you have it selected. And we want to replace that with SM factory floor large. So we can right click on the floor once we have the static mesh selected down here to do the replace like we did earlier. And it'll get replaced like so. It seems like it replaces it 1-to-1. We maybe, however, want to change its size down to its normal scale. And then we can move this one around to fit a little bit better. Something like that. Should be good enough. And then we can multiply this by making copies by holding down Alt and then dragging out like we've learned earlier. However, we should probably, if we press delete and remove this, we should probably have some snapping here. What you can do is you can open up the SM factory floor, and then you can see it has the dimensions of, I'm not sure it's very visible here, but it's 1600 times 1600 times 10. So 10 is the height of it, and 1600 is the width and the length of it. So since we know that size now, what we can do is we can make a snapping for translation. This one, and we put this one to, okay, we don't have 1600, but we have 100. So we can hold in Alt and then drag, and then you see pretty big chunks, and you see that when you get past here, you can get an exact fitting to it in sideway. So we can do the same over here, and then we can actually mark all three of these by holding down Control while mark one, hold down Control, click on another one with left mouse button, and then another one, and then you have all three of them selected. The pivot point for these will be where the pivot point is on the last object, so it's for now on the third one over there, you can see. But now we can do the same thing where we copy it, holding down Alt and dragging it, and we drag all three of them. So we make our ground a little bit faster, and we'll make it one last time so that we cover all the area within the walls. So now we've made floor. Let's do the same for walls. So if we mark a wall, go to the meshes, and we find the static mesh that is called SM concrete wall. Select it, right click, replace, and then we'll reset its resizing. Now it's coming in tilted for us here, so we'll start off by rotating it 90 degrees, dragging it down. Now we still have the snapping for 100, which might not serve us very well here, because you can see that it's probably gonna, it's gonna miss by a lot. So let's change it down to something like 10, get something that looks better, something like that maybe. Then we'll drag that one out to the corner, something like that maybe. And we can remove all the other walls also for now, because we won't be needing them and we will be replacing them shortly. So let's say we want to have will make it easy for us. So we can fiddle around with making it even prettier later, but we can alt and drag up so we get a new wall like so. Let's say we make them 4 walls high. Is that a little bit too much? Might be. Let's actually open up this one and see what kind of size it has. So this one has a size of 400 to 43 200. So it has 200, and that's probably gonna be its height here, yeah. And 43 is gonna be its width along that axis. So the length we have here is actually 402. So 200 in height and 402 in width. This isn't ideal because we won't have like very nice snapping like every 100 or something like that. But we can try and see what it looks like. So we'll have like 4 in height. Then we left click all of them. Make sure you get all of them. There we go. Then we'll alt drag. So we will probably have, yeah, we will have a little bit of a crevasse here, which represents a few millimeters, or rather centimeters in the game. If we were to put it so it's intersecting each other, what does that look like? Up close you can sort of see it's a bit of a problem, but it's not too bad, so I think we can live with that. So we'll just continue with the same thing. We can click multiple ones since we have made more now, when we can drag a whole section of 8. Then we can mark all of those. Make sure that we have an even larger section. Drag that one out. And let's say we make one more. So we'll drag it out like so. Let's see how that looks. That looks okay. So it doesn't look super pretty, but it'll do for our purposes. So we will, what we can do is we find all of them over here in the world outliner. Wall 1 will be the first one, since we've made 48. Can hold shift and select all of them. Then when we've done that, we can just drag all of them over to the other side. Let's say something like so. Then we can do the same thing like we've done before, but instead we change to rotation and we hold down Alt, so we'll get one like so. So at 90 degrees. And then we'll translate this one over to the other side as well. So now we have a sort of factory. We have a bunch of walls and we have a floor. We have some areas here which we should probably sink a little bit into the floor again, since they have risen since we replaced the floor. We can click on the text that says first person template and click delete to remove that. We can get rid of our boxes. Won't be needing those. That's not what I wanted to do. Control Z will undo anything that you have done in case you make a mistake. Like so. This is our pickup, we don't need to have that one right now. Okay, it's starting to look a little bit better. We might want to also make sure that our table is snug with the floor by pressing end. And we can do the same for our first person character. We can remove that blue box over there. Our spawner is probably fine over there. Okay, looks a little bit better. It's a start. Now might be a good time to just take some items that we've taken from the other project and scatter them around a bit, give this place a little bit more of a, well, interesting feel to it rather than just very open space. So we can drop in things like containers and place them in different areas. Just go wild with your creativity and make something interesting. There's no right or wrong generally. It's a matter of taste, but this is a good time to play around and have some fun with basically decorating and creating a level that would look a little bit more interesting. So I will put some items in the level and decorate it a bit. They will all be cosmetic for now, and then we'll resume the video after I've decorated it a little bit and we can see what it looks like, and maybe you can get some inspiration from it as well for your own level. So this is what my level currently looks like. I have put some objects in here and there to make it less empty and give it a little bit of a sense of a factory, sort of what we're going for. However, the first part is always just like putting in meshes, but that's not usually what sells a feeling or an environment. It's usually coming together when you do things like details and lighting, and that's usually what sells an environment so that it's like believable. And we'll get a little bit into that later. However, first I want to go back to something we did earlier, which was that we changed the collision boxes for these drop-off areas. And we didn't go into detail why that was, and I didn't put that much effort into explaining why that was a problem because I wasn't entirely sure. I just did a quick fix. But I don't like teaching things haphazardly and incorrectly. I want you to get an understanding for everything that we do here together, so that what you get is not just an instruction of how to do this game, but rather how and why things are done the way they are, so that you can use that information and that knowledge yourself to make decisions that might even be better than the ones that I come up with. Anyway, back to the point here where I'm getting at is that we went in, and I even have it here open still. If we go to the static mesh for, that's the wrong one, the static mesh for the conveyor belt or the drop-off area, what we did was we changed the box of the collision, the green area that you see here. We changed it because when we had items dropping on the box, they were falling or floating in air. Let me demonstrate quickly. So we take this fire extinguisher, we put it over here, and you see that it's floating in the air. And the reason for that is the collision box. So what we did was we lowered the collision box over here so that it would look like it's not floating. But I want us to fix that now. So what I've done is I have moved the collision box up here to its regular position, so you see that it covers everything like it did in the beginning, and then we will go through why this is a problem. And you might actually see it already if you're perceptive, but if you're not, we'll go through it together. So one way of seeing what our problem is to examine the collision boxes in the world. And in Unreal you have a bunch of different settings that you can change up here in the top left. One of the things is like have a lit mode to see what it's like with light, and an unlit mode so that you can see everything clear without the lights being a problem, like if you're working in dark areas and such. But what's interesting for us right now is the player collision here. And if you click the player collision, you can see something is a little bit odd here. You see that this is where our drop-off area is, but it's not covering the whole volume. And it's also a bit higher up than we expect, because if we go back to lit again, you can see it's actually not that high up from the ground. So this is a clue to what is going wrong here. When we go to our drop-off area blueprint, let's see if we can find the drop-off area. There we go, this blueprint. And we go back to our player collision mode so we can see the collision. You might remember that when we scaled this object around for us to get something that looked like sort of square-ish, we changed the scale of the y-axis, the green one, to 1.5. If we were to scale this back to 1, you can see that now it fits the volume and it is not as high from the ground as it was before. So these things together told me what the problem was here. If we go into, let's put this back to 1.5 so we can see how incorrect it is again. If we compile and save, if we go back into the static mesh, you can see that the gizmo is pointing in a direction which is not what we expect. The green arrow is down instead of going in this direction down here. Let's make this larger so it's clear to see. The green arrow is down instead of well, being a negative blue arrow, which is what it should be. The X arrow and the Z arrow, none of the arrows are actually in the direction that they should be in this gizmo. And the reason for this is that the collision box itself has been put in with different axes than the actual mesh itself. So when we scale the mesh in in any direction actually, let's say Y, that means that the collision box will also scale, but it will scale in a different axis because it's not aligned with the actual mesh. So what we can do to fix this is we can make sure to click the green area so you get the gizmo. Make sure to also have a collision, simple collision marked here in the top so you can actually see the green area if you can't. So you have that marked and you just press the delete key, then the collision box will actually disappear from the object. And then we can create a new one by going to the menu option of collision and adding a simplified collision. And you can see that it will auto-generate something that will be fairly correct. However, it is a little bit too high. And we could move this down a little bit. Something like that looks fine, I think. And save that. And if we go back into our map now, you can see that the collision area here is fitting better with our volume, what we expect. The height is not as high up as it was before. And this is despite having our scaling in 1.5, which messed it up before. So this is the proper way to fix this particular issue that we ran into. And if we now go and pick something up here, it should look much better if we drop it on top of the area. See. Okay, so now with that bug out of the way, let's get back to our level. So what I've done here is, like I said, I've put a few things around here. I put some different containers and pallets and other containers, some staircases here and there. I also made it so that this little area here actually has a drop-off area. So you have to go up these stairs to go up here, and then you have to drop off your fire extinguishers, which it says in this direction, fire extinguishers. Just making the level a little bit more interesting. So if you have a fire extinguisher, this is where you have to run to drop it off, and these are the engines. We can move that to some other place, of course. I also put in this little assembly line box here because I'm planning that we can possibly layer some more functionality with this one later on. Also along this wall over here you see an electric supply switch. I also placed this one here because I figured we can possibly build some layered functionality game logic to that as well. Yeah, so that's basically it. So this is the level that I currently have. So let's build upon it further. Let's make it a little bit nicer. So there's a combination of a lot of things that sells a level. So let's go and look into some things like the floor. The floor looks very clean, very symmetrical because it's the same everywhere. And that is usually how you have a mesh with something like floors. But in games you rarely see the same floor identically over and over again. You see some imperfections and some dirt littered on it, or grease or blood or paper or something like that. And that's called decals. And I thought we should now do some altering of the environment by using decals. So we will go into the other project and get some decals, and then we'll come back. So we are back in the factory map now, but this is the actual demonstration area now, not the overview where we saw all the assets. So to describe what we were talking about, here you can see this stuff all over the place. You can see these icons that look like sort of like a circle that has its edge slightly bent a little bit all over the place. Usually they're like, this one is halfway through the floor, so we only see the top half. You can see one over here where we see the left part of it, and they're basically all over the floor. And what those are decals. So if we were to click on one of these, you can see that we get a green box around it, sort of like the collision box. And what this is actually a projection area, because a decal is something that you project from a certain angle onto an area. So if I were to lift this one up into the air, you can see that the sign that was on the ground is gone. If I lift it back down, you can see that it appears again on the area. And this works on everything, so it overlaps something else, then it would start writing on that as well. So you can see now the palette gets the decal as well, which might not be what you want. And the decal can also be altered in angles, and then you see that it will try to draw it as best as it can according to where the projection sphere actually overlaps with terrain. This is both a very powerful object, but it had or powerful way of putting some differentiation in your world, but also it has some limitations, like it doesn't do very well in case you were to put it against a surface that is 90 degrees, for example, in relation to it. Let's see if we can maybe demonstrate a little bit quickly here so you see. So if we move this over here, you can possibly see here. So now it's trying to predict it from top down, because that's what this is currently angled to do with this these rotations like this. But the area is intersecting with the wall, and since it has like a zero amount of area in width to draw on here, since the wall is completely straight, it will stretch out the projection map, the decal, which makes it doesn't look that good if you end up in a situation like that. So you have to be aware about things like that. And also you have situations like the overlap that we talked about earlier. Let's see if I can find something. So here, for example, here you can see this looks really good on this map with all this grease and smudge and stuff like that. But you can see that it's not actually projecting on any of the other objects here around. We can't see the grease on the conveyor belt or the machine or anything like that. And the reason for that is most likely they have made this very thin. So if I try to mark this one, okay, we actually see it here. So the green box here, you can see it's like barely over the ground, which allows it to project only on the ground which they want to, but nothing else around here. But yeah, so we're gonna take a few of these decals into our level to make sure that we get some imperfections and break up the symmetry a little bit and make it look a little bit more believable. And to find these decals, what you can do is right click on any of them and then browse to assets, just like any other object basically. And you can see that we end up in the materials folder. So here they have a bunch of MI, which is material instance for decals, and then you have like dirt stains and traces and things like that. So I'm gonna be taking some of these decals, bringing them back into the other project. You can look around and see whichever ones that you feel are fitting for your level and do the same. And I'll provide a description of all the names that I used personally for my level in case you want to reuse the same ones, or if you want to freeform it by using your own ones. That's up to you. There, a few decals have been placed all over the place to break up some of the cleanliness, make it a little bit more imperfect. Now we will move on to some particle effects. So if you go over to another project, there's a folder called FX, which are particle effects, and these are just like the material instances. You can just drag and drop them into the world to get some effects going on to give it a little bit more of life. So migrate the ones that you want to have in your project and put them in places where you feel that they fit. I will put a list of the ones that I will be putting in my project and show you off later on how they look, and we'll go from there. There we are. Some special effects put into the machine over here to make it look like something is happening here, some kind of steam from working or something like that. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense maybe, but doesn't always need to, just to give a sense of life and motion. Equally, the fuse box over here has gotten a sparks, so you probably shouldn't be working with this, but yeah. So few special effects are put into the level now. Let's go back to the other one, the factory environment, and now I figured we might as well get some audio from here. And again, you may take whatever audio you want here, but for me I think that the main ambient one is gonna be sufficient. It's not too abrasive on your hearing, but it still gives you some kind of sense of life when you're playing the game, and gives a factory feel to it as well. So feel free to add it or anything else into the project that you want, and I'll continue in a little bit. Now that we are back in our project again, we have our audio here. What you most likely want to do is you want to go and create a cue. When you right click on a sound file, create cue, and then we can keep the naming convention, it's fine. You can see a queue as sort of a container for sounds. You can use queues sort of like blueprints to have some effect of you can edit and manipulate sounds. You can have a lot of different sounds that play randomized between each other. You can have sound sequenced and things like that. So it's a little bit out of the scope for this specific tutorial, but just so you know that it is capable of all of those things. And then when you have a cue made, you can just more or less drag it into the world, and you have it available. So I took the liberty of adding a second audio file here. You can see that I've added cue called, or the sound as light switch, and made a cue of it already. The reason for this is that I'm a big believer of giving player feedback for different things, because that is how you reward them and also communicate with them without being super obvious. So like for example, I've added in some decals here. You can see that I have a yellow line that's leading towards the fire extinguisher area where you drop off those, and then I have an orange one that leads to where you drop off the engines. And in addition to that, now we can add some sounds, I figured, to when you drop off an item at the right drop off area. So if we go to the class, the blueprint drop off area, and then we find the event which is desired pickup found, we can drag off a connector that says play sound. 2D should be fine. You can say play at location, but since this will always be where we are, it doesn't really matter that much. And then you can choose a sound file here, so light switch for example. And here you can see you can actually play the audio file by itself, or you can play the cue. It might be better to play the cue because then you can put some logic into how you want that one to work, and you can change the volume and stuff like that to configure it a little bit to your needs. So now if we play, we should be having some ambient sound of the factory. You see that we have our decals everywhere, making it look a little bit more dirty, a little bit more imperfect. Pick up that engine, drop it off over here, get a little light switch sound, giving the player some kind of feedback that it did something good. That is all for part 4. Hope to see you in part 5. Keep on learning.